Hello. It's another Wednesday, so it's time for another weekend reading. So, let's get started. What did we have last week? Oh, it was actually a surprising weekend. Let's see. We had Reign of X, Volume 6, which was a pretty good read. We had Geiger, Volume 1, which is a book I was iffy about. And then we had Sinister War, which was the book I was looking the most forward to. This ended up becoming somewhat of a disappointment because I didn't see why this needed to be its own miniseries. It's really just filler, and it was disappointing. I expected this to be the favorite of the week. It was not. The favorite of the week, surprise, surprise, was Geiger. I was nervous about Geoff Johns because some of his work in recent years has not been good, but this was pretty good. An original work from him with his often collaborator Gary Frank. Gary Frank's art has always been stellar, and the colors by Brad Anderson work so well with it. Well, to put it simply, it's a book that takes place in the year 2050. But even where the book starts is kind of still in the future. It starts in 2030, where a war, I don't know if I think they said maybe Russia or something like that, but basically a nuclear war breaks out, and the United States gets hit. And it starts with this guy named Tariq Geiger, who, is it Tariq? Yes, Tariq Geiger, who is trying to get his family into a bomb shelter he built, because I guess he was anticipating this strike, and something goes wrong. I won't get into too much detail about what, but something goes wrong. He gets caught outside where his family gets in the shelter, and he gets blown up. Now we fast forward 20 years later, the year 2050, somewhere in Nevada. I guess it was in Nevada originally too, or somewhere at least around the West Coast area. And just outside of Vegas, there's scavengers all over the place. You can't go outside without protective suits because there's just too much radiation. And these scavengers are scavenging this place, and there's a guy who's not in a protective suit, and it's Tariq. And now he roams the land as this mysterious, almost folktale-like figure referred to as the Glowing Man, because he has this special suit that has like control rods in the back, and if he takes the rods out and uses them like truncheons, his body becomes irradiated, and he starts to glow with radiation, like glowing green, where you can see the skeleton. It's actually kind of cool looking, and he just produces a massive amount of radiation. He gets in conflict with this. It turns out Vegas is like sort of a safe zone that's controlled by like a group of warlords who operate out of casinos on the Strip, and they have like everything's like sort of like in protective tunnels and domes, and each warlord has their own little fiefdom in Vegas, and one of them is this kid called the King, who inherited it from his father, and he's trying to get the remains of the nuclear football, but I guess NORAD still exists. There's still some remnants of the government, and they're trying to get their hands on the nuclear football, and somehow these kids from Vegas get their hands on it, and they run into Tariq, and he protects them to get them to NORAD, but when they get to NORAD, Tariq also has a two-headed dog, I should point out, like a mutated two-headed dog he calls Barney. They get to NORAD. NORAD turns out to be a problem because one of the kids has cancer, and they don't take anybody who's sick, so they're going to kill him, and his sister tries to stop him, and Tariq helps them get away, and they get attacked by this like robot called Junkyard Joe, who's like a robot soldier that's been around since the Vietnam War. And basically the whole thing is they're introducing this whole new like timeline of where there's been these mysterious figures called, I think they're called the Unseen or the Unknown or something like that, and they have basically been acting throughout history, and Geiger is now one of them. And it's setting up this whole basically like new world and mythology that steps back. So it could be like more books, but not necessarily about this particular character, although there's more of a story to tell. But there could be like more stories of like other characters, including that robot they introduced, which I find interesting. And like I said, I love the art. The story was very interesting. Definitely seems like some good old Geoff Johns type writing, and like I said, the art by Gary Frank is always stellar. So this is Geiger, or whatever future comes from it, whatever they change the name, if they change the name or whatever. I highly recommend it. Great book. But that was last weekend. I rambled on for a bit there, didn't I? That was last weekend. What do we got this weekend? Well, for starters, we have Batman Urban Legends Volume 1. No subtitle, just that. Okay. Following the events of the Joker War, which I haven't even read yet, Gotham City is home to more iconic heroes and villains than ever. Batman Urban Legends Volume 1 follows the iconic adventures of these characters as told by the industry's finest creators. Red Hood has returned to Gotham City, but has been pushed to the edge by his investigation of a new drug called Cheer Drops that has taken the city by storm and brought up ugly memories of his youth. Batman will have to stop Red Hood from making violent mistakes he won't be able to take back in this epic brought to you by all-star writer Chip Zdarsky and iconic DC artist Eddie Barrows. Following his excellent outing with Grifter and future state dark detective, acclaimed writer Matthew Rosenberg returns to Cole Cash, joined by fan-favorite artist Ryan Benjamin, to tell a tale that finds the legendary antihero running personal security for Lucius Fox, but seriously working for the mysterious Halo Corporation, and running afoul of every hero Gotham City has. Batman Urban Legends Volume 1 collects the Batman, Red Hood, and Grifter feature stories from issues 1 through 6 of Batman Urban Legends. Okay, so this takes place after the Joker War, which is a story that I haven't read yet in Batman, but hopefully is coming soon, but it looks good, so we'll see. A little off kilter here. We have Star Wars: The High Republic Volume 2, The Heart of Drenger? I don't know. Let's see. As the galaxy prepares to celebrate the Republic Fair of Valo, a fierce battle rages in the depths of wild space, and the Jedi of Starlight Beacon must join forces with their most feared enemy to face the terror of the unstoppable Drenger horde. And when Avar Kriss and her new allies fight nightmarish creatures on a harsh lava world, young Jedi Keeve Trennis puts everything on the line to save her former master from the darkness. Meanwhile, who or what is the great progenitor? And will the Jedi find other forces at work on Drenger's death world? Plus, the villainous Nihil may be in retreat, but they cast a long shadow. Guest starring Comac Vitus, Reith Salas, and Orla Jarina, Jedi Wayseeker from the blockbuster novel Star Wars: The High Republic Into the Dark, which is a novel I haven't read yet, but I will when it comes out in paperback. Collecting Star Wars: The High Republic 6 through 10 by Cavan Scott, Georges Genti, Ario Anindito, Carl Story, Mark Morales, and Annalisa Leone. The last volume of it was pretty good. And here's one that I've been looking forward to. This one's been taking a while to come out. Green Lantern, Season 2, Volume 1. Yeah. Let's see. New York Times best-selling author Grant Morrison and artist extraordinaire Liam Sharp and Zermanico, I guess that's the colorist, return with another exciting volume of Green Lantern Hal Jordan escapades across space. After the events of the last series, the universe has been remade into a version where the Green Lantern Corps never existed. Hal, now known as Black Star Parallax, stands among the mightiest of Controller Mu's elite soldiers, who maintain order by exerting absolute control. He has the galaxy's greatest protector succumbed to his dark side again? Has the galaxy's greatest protector succumb to the dark side again? Or will Hal's rebellious nature actually be his greatest asset in rediscovering the true strength of the power of will? The The adventure continues in Green Lantern Season 2, Volume 1, a galaxy-hopping trek that cements Morrison's reputation as one of the best writers in comic books and fiction, collecting Green Lantern Black Stars 1 through 3 and Green Lantern Season 2, 1 through 6. Oh, so this is going to be a big one. Let me see, who is Zermanico? Okay, I guess Zermanico is also an artist, because the colorist is Steve Oliff. It literally just looks like Liam Sharp Zermanico, but I guess it's two different people. Must be interesting to just go by one name. Anyways, that's what's for next weekend. Now, I was planning on just... I was originally planning on closing everything out. Like I said, I was running out of stuff to do in this little third bit. I was originally planning to do an abandoned plot. But when it comes to the abandoned plots, I want to make sure that I'm absolutely right that the story has just been abandoned. So I actually went looking into the story I was going to tell. It was about I'm not going to get into it, but when I went looking into it, I found out that the plot hadn't been abandoned. The plot thread hadn't been abandoned. It was just there was a part of it that I didn't see, that I missed. There was a bit of story that I missed that explained why one thing just went into another thing instead of just this one thing getting dropped and picking up a new thing. There's actually an explanation for it. So I realized it wasn't an abandoned plot, so I was like, okay, then I guess we'll just not do anything. But then I started having another thought, another weird random thought came to me in my fucking stupid nerdy brain. And this is why I'm actually going to close things out with how I started them, with a question of the week. Okay. So, what inspired this question of the week is about... Well, it has to be almost 2 weeks ago now. Over a week ago, because it was just before Christmas. About 2 weeks ago, I went and saw Spider-Man No Way Home. I've actually made a video for it, but I haven't released it yet because I haven't gotten around to editing it yet because I've been lazy. Sorry, but it'll come out eventually. Anyways. I've watched Spider-Man No Way Home, and it had a bunch of characters. Now, two of the major villains in it, one they advertised heavily in the commercials. The other they didn't, but he is in it. The one they advertised heavily in the commercials is Alfred Molina, who plays Dr. Octopus in the movie. The one they didn't was Willem Dafoe, who plays Green Goblin again, who's reprising Green Goblin. Now, the funny thing is, in the movie, Dr. Octopus starts as the major villain, but then quickly they kind of, like, the whole thing is about fixing the problems of the villains, and they fix his problem, and he's not a villain anymore. But Green Goblin, who at first pretends like he's not so much as a villain, ends up double-crossing Spider-Man, and he becomes, like, the major villain of the movie. He's, like, the main villain of the movie. Spoiler alert. But he's, like, the major villain. Even the last fight comes down between him and Spider-Man. And that got me thinking about arch enemies. Every major comic book hero has an arch enemy. In fact, when it comes to fictional heroes, I've always felt that they're defined by their enemies. Some characters are even eclipsed by their enemies because their enemies can be more interesting. Like, I wasn't going to say, but anyways, there's plenty of well-known characters that have arch enemies. Like, Captain America has the Red Skull. Or Superman has Lex Luthor. Or, Wolverine has Sabretooth. Or, as I was just talking about him, Batman has the Joker. Now, these are enemies, they're arch enemies because, like, arch means, like, the arch enemy isn't necessarily the first enemy they had. That would be much easier to define. The arch enemy is the guy that is the enemy you first think of. Like, when you think of that hero, that's the first villain that comes to mind. That's the one you associate, like they're parallel, like they're mirror image almost. It doesn't even necessarily have to be a complete opposite, although they do reflect something about the character usually. So, there is some sort of like reflection or opposite element to all those guys I mentioned. But it's usually a hero that has fucked with the hero the most, especially on a personal level. And all those villains I mentioned have fucked with their respective heroes more than any other villain they have. Except for maybe Superman. He was killed by someone else, but there's no way Doomsday would be considered his archenemy. It's a fucking lame-ass character. But anyways, that's not the point. I was thinking about Spider-Man. Spider-Man, second only to maybe Batman, has maybe the biggest collection of colorful villains in comic books. But I can't quite define who his archenemy is. He's got a lot of big enemies, but it's hard to define who's the enemy who most defines him. Now, you could say that it's his own ineptitude, that maybe he's his own worst enemy. But it's comic books. Let's not get so fucking poetic. So, who is Spider-Man's archenemy? And I was thinking that in the movie, you have these two big villains, and I would say that of his villains, it's between two choices. The ones I just mentioned before. It's either Dr. Octopus or the Green Goblin. Because they are the guys who, if you think about it, have fucked with him the most. Now let's break down the examples of how they have. Let's start with Dr. Octopus. Dr. Octopus has been one of Spider-Man's longest villains, appearing way back in Amazing Spider-Man Issue 3, way back in 1963. So we're talking a nearly 60-year-old character here. Now, some of the things that he is, on top of just being a major recurring villain for that long of time, even dying and coming back from the dead to do it, he's done several things. He was key in forming the Sinister Six and was their original leader and is leading them again. So that's a pretty big deal because the Sinister Six has always been a thorn in Spider-Man's side. So Dr. Octopus is directly behind that. He once was in a scheme where he almost married Spider-Man's aunt May. That was a pretty big deal. And it's just been a major thorn in his side. Now there's one other thing he's done, but I'm going to get to that at the end, because that's the major thing. Now let's move on to the Green Goblin. Green Goblin is a little bit of an older character. He first showed up in Amazing Spider-Man issue 14. So it was probably a couple years after. Maybe the late 60s? Mid to late 60s? Now, he's had a very personal connection to Spider-Man because he's actually, in reality, Norman Osborn, who's the father of Spider-Man's best friend, Harry Osborn. He also has been... His actions and cruelty ended up driving Harry so insane that he would later take up the mantle of the Green Goblin himself, which would get him killed. So his actions sort of indirectly led to the death of Spider-Man's best friend, after it led to Spider-Man's best friend trying to kill him. And let's see. He also was behind a plot to... At one point, Spider-Man was cloned by a villain of his, and that clone supposedly died, but then it came back, now calling himself Ben Reilly, and showed up originally as the Scarlet Spider, but then actually took over for a while as Spider-Man, and then supposedly died, and then he came back again, and now he's going to be Spider-Man again. It's complicated. But at one point, they just thought that Peter's powers were acting weird, and so that's why Ben Reilly took over as Spider-Man, and they thought Ben was the clone and Peter was Peter. But then there was information given that Peter was the clone And Ben Reilly was the original Spider-Man, and they just got tricked into thinking it was the other way around. But it turns out that was actually a trick concocted by Norman Osborn to make Peter think he wasn't the actual Peter Parker. And then on top of that, at one point Mary Jane was pregnant with Peter's kid, and Norman had her poisoned, so she had a miscarriage. So he calls Spider-Man a kid. And then, at one point, during one of his crazy things, excuse me, he killed one of Peter's best friends, Flash Thompson, who at the time was going around as a character named Anti-Venom, although he's come back from the dead. So that was a big thing. Those were some big things, but that wasn't the biggest thing. So you held back on the biggest thing that each one of them had. And this is the thing that I think defines them the most, because it helps define Spider-Man the most. Norman Osborn is the guy who threw Gwen Stacy off a bridge when Peter tried to save her, ended up accidentally killing her. So Norman Osborn kind of like, he's directly responsible for her death, but it also led to guilt that Peter feels himself for thinking he kind of killed his girlfriend, which is a deep cut. That's the big thing he did. The big thing Dr. Octopus did is at one point he actually stole Spider-Man's life. He created a device when Dr. Octopus was dying at one point. He created a device to switch their minds. So Peter ended up in Dr. Octopus's body, and Dr. Octopus ended up in Peter's body. And then Peter died in Dr. Octopus's body. And there was, it's kind of weird how Peter came back, but he came back. But it was like he had ultimately won. Like, Dr. Octopus stole Peter's life. He stole being Spider-Man, and then let Peter die in his dying body. I mean, that's like the ultimate revenge. And that's a really deep one. And at one point when Peter was running a company that technically Dr. Octopus started, Dr. Octopus helped bring it down. But the stealing the life is really the big thing. And then at one point he was kind of like, he decided to actually be a hero, but then he went back to being a villain eventually. But it's stealing a dude's life and then letting him die in your body. That's a big fucking move. So when you try to take it between those two things, it's harder to find. Because I think that Dr. Octopus has done the way more heinous thing to Peter. But I think in terms of just sheer volume of shit he's done, it's Green Goblin. So in terms of arch enemy, I think I have to lean towards Green Goblin. That's just my opinion. But that's the question. Between these two, between Dr. Octopus and Green Goblin, who is Spider-Man's arch nemesis? I lean towards Green Goblin. You tell me what you think. Or don't even think about it. It's up to you. I don't care. Anyways, that went on for too long. That's it for this weekend. Or this week, or whatever. I hope you enjoy your weekend, and I hope you enjoy your reading. Have a good one, folks.